Okay. Where do we go from here?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Good afternoon, Grand Junction. That was a cringe over there.
That was a cringe. I did a visible cringe.
Visible cringe. Live from Calvary Cast Studio A.
There's more than one?
Well, no, that was just A. There could be more than
We
that.
used to do this way in the back.
We're in the
off of
whole
room 9 there, out in that windowless.
window. That was like a
Hold
true
up.
studio room.
It did. It felt more like a studio.
It is
than
really
that.
dark. This is better. The office with the books and the window. And it feels
We're
more
one
nice.
step away from live videoing on YouTube.
No, we're a lot of steps away from that still.
Okay.
Because it takes a lot of
That'd be
work to
cool.
do that.
It just is more. It would make us more afraid of what people would think. About what we're
Wow.
That was good. That was good. Really good. Well, people can probably hear we have a guest. We said we wanted more guests on the podcast, and so we had one show up today. So
Yeah,
Ayden
they
is
called
here.
me in
Stick
specifically.
closer to your microphone there.
Oh, okay, my apologies.
There you go. That's better. Yeah.
doing. Rookie mistake. Don't
Rookie
worry
I'm
about
so
mistake.
it.
sorry, guys.
This is Ayden Thomas. He's not unfamiliar to podcast listeners.
No.
He was like the voice of Jesus on some of our Easter.
Yeah, so if you're thinking, wow, who is this guy with... No, I'm not going to finish that.
Or he was the voice behind our viral Instagram video, the camera,
Yep.
the voice behind the
I'm
camera.
the voiceless man.
He's the
a
faceless
man.
man. Right. He's
The only
he's a
I only
listener.
have voice.
he has a
Yeah.
face for radio, as they say,
You have a radio face, and you're a listener
And
though,
you're a
to our
listener.
I'm a
podcast,
listener
which
as well.
is
from time to time,
sets
which is
you
rare.
apart from other people.
Yeah, it's
It
rare.
makes you unique from
Yeah.
other people
It's-
around you.
It's rare that we have listeners to our podcast. So when we do, we're like, "Would you come on the? Would you want to come hang
Please.
out?"
We have to show that.
Don't make us feel so weird. So anyway, yeah. No, we have been away for a little bit. Pastoral duties, life, things like that just happen. And so the sponsors were calling, and the listeners were calling, and here we are,
Yeah,
episode
to do some
99.
Wow, that's something.
We still got to figure out what we're going to do for our 100th. So we're taking suggestions. It seems like we got to do something more than just
Something big.
something big. Cake.
Well, what would that do for a podcast?
Yeah,
so if we
you
got
have
a cake.
in it that they
Do you mean
can't
like
see.
after we do the podcast?
Well,
then
we eat the cake while we podcast or something like that. I don't know.
that it'd be interesting. That
Yeah.
would be interesting.
Yeah, they just listen to you eat cake for like...
And then we
20
could say,
minutes.
let them eat cake.
And there we go.
Yeah.
I guess it's settled. That's what we're doing.
All right. If anybody wants to provide the cake for the podcast, reach out.
Yeah,
to
somebody
me.
somebody has to do it, though.
That's a whole thing.
Wow.
All right. I don't have any more banter. Do you?
Nope,
All right.
I'm out.
Book of the month.
Well,
We have a new book of the month.
Yes, we do. Called Dispatches from the Front. And it is, we were talking about how to pronounce this man's name. He's
Tim Kaisi.
Tim Kaisi.
it's not a easy word to say.
Huh? Oh, wow.
Did you get it?
Kind
It's
of.
not a...
Okay, the banter segment's over.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
I-
Stop interrupting here.
No, I'm
I'm
kidding,
so
I'm
sorry.
We're
kidding,
just
I'm kidding.
teasing you.
Did you get it, though?
Do you feel fearful?
Are you afraid? Are you afraid of us right now? Do you fear us? You'll know what that's talking about,
Yeah.
by the way, listener.
You're setting it up here.
Soon. Anyway, why are we talking about being afraid? But book
of the month.
Dispatches from the Front mission book. If you've ever seen the video series Dispatches from the Front, that's what it's based on. Tim Kaisi's trips around the world and to different missionaries they support, seeing what the Lord's doing around the world. It's really great. Both of them are, either the video or the book or both. There were a few more things in the books that weren't in the video, so you, as always, you.
So does the
hear
book
more.
follow the videos? It's same.
It's the same locations.
Okay. So when
And-
he's journaling in the videos, he's
Yes.
writing his book.
I didn't know that when I first saw the videos, but yeah, that's what
kinda
it turned
cool.
into, the videos and then that book. So
Interesting.
if you want to read through those and even have that book around and maybe need some encouragement or whatever, that you could just read one section of it one time, you know?
This fell under the category kind of a missionary biography type book.
Yeah, it would fall under that. And it's definitely a mission oriented book. It is a missions book.
Mhm.
And
But not a theological missions book, not like a
No.
why of missions.
No,
it's
no,
more
no.
a
stories.
like,
It's the
story.
stories of what he encountered when
Right.
he went around traveling, and he is with what is it?
Frontline? I think
Frontline
Frontline.
International mission organization, and kind of just helping people see what the Lord's doing in other places in the world. So I love the videos, especially the one on Albania is my favorite. And then this has been really good to read, and I'll have it around, and every once in a while I'll pull it out. When I start feeling discouraged, I'll pull that out and read about Christians that really have problems, and then I'll feel like a wimp and confess my
confess your problems.
Discouragement and get encouraged.
Would you say it's a difficult read, or would you say it's?
Oh no, it's
Would you
easy.
say? Would you say it's easy?
It's
Yeah, where's the rim?
Oh, yeah.
Where's the rim shot when you need it?
Hold on.
Would you say that? Oh,
there it is. It's cut easy.
Wow.
Easy.
Take it easy.
Yeah.
Ayden is an aspiring podcaster. He's trying to learn from us.
Well, he's a natural.
That's what
He's a
this
natural.
is.
You
Yeah.
know? Yeah. Anyway, check out the book, Dispatches from the Front. You can buy it at our bookstore.
You can find it right on the table, real easy like.
Wow. Wow.
All right, time to move on. Topic of the day.
You know, I'm slightly disappointed you don't play that live with your fingers.
Well, you didn't have to give away the secrets behind the trade. People didn't know that.
Oh,
we
I
didn't play
mean,
that live.
what I mean was,
You should say, "Wow, Graham, you're a really accomplished pianist."
I can't believe you just did that right then and there.
I know.
Every time, exactly the same.
Yeah, well,
That's amazing.
It's talent. You can
Yeah.
only learn from the pros. Our topic of the day: the fear of man.
Now they understand.
Now they
They're like,
understand.
Wow.
And
"Oh,
this
why are
is
they talking about
also
being afraid of people."
why we brought Ayden on, because Ayden exemplifies the fear of man like nobody else I know.
That's right. So
Wait.
he's a little scaredy
Wait a minute.
cat. He's a little scaredy cat, so we brought him on.
We're like, Ayden just
This
talks
is
about
a-
how
yeah.
you live your life, and it will tell people what not to
yes.
do.
This
No.
is it. This is just a secret indictment against me.
It is. We've
That's why
planned
you
this
wanted
the
me to
whole
meet
time. The whole time you could be our. I told you you'd be the butt of a lot of jokes. Anyway, we're talking about the fear of man. I'll set us up a little bit here with this conversation. There are certain categories that I think are really important for Christians to have kind of ingrained in their vernacular, right? The way they think about their own lives and evaluate their hearts and their heart motivations. And so fear of man is one of those categories. The Bible talks about it. Well, actually, like if you find the phrase the fear of man, not very frequently in the scriptures, but it talks about it in a number of other ways. So that's what we're going to do. Other categories maybe we'll tackle in the future, things like heart idolatry, right? Like what does it mean to have idols of the heart? They're very, understanding those terms and how the Bible talks about them are very helpful for analyzing our own hearts and souls and motivations, right? You ask yourself, why do I do what I do? Questions like the fear of man and idols of the heart are very probing in that way. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's right. And I think we should probably begin, well, maybe you already began, but even just defining fear. What is fear of man?
Yeah, we could do that. Or we could just read the one passage that maybe references the fear of man.
Okay, yeah,
Right.
good.
Proverbs 29:25. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Right.
Right.
So I think we'll kind of work our way into a definition of the fear of man because it's kind of multifaceted. But maybe just thinking about that first, Proverbs 29:25. What things do we see here about the fear of man? The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. There's obviously, fearing man is in opposition to trusting the Lord.
Yeah. And it's destructive. So the two things I hear in that, right? It's destructive.
It's destructive. It's
dangerous.
dangerous.
Dangerous and destructive, and it is...
ensnaring. That would go along with that same thing, right?
Yeah. That actually really... Because I hadn't looked at that verse, and I lost the sheet you gave me. But I have all my own notes here.
Okay.
So
This
I was
is
like,
going to
this
be
is really-
real interesting to see how this goes.
No, that's really good, actually.
Right, but think about the nature of a snare, right? It's an entrapment. And if you think about, we'll talk about fear, really, it's in terms of awe, right? And once you're in awe of something, it's hard to get away from being in awe of it to a degree, right? The other thing that you think about, the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. There's an element of bondage to the fear of man. it's not freeing, right? That, again, that idea of being ensnared by it. And then ultimately, it is an issue of trusting the Lord. If I'm fearing man, I'm not trusting God, is what is ultimately happening there. Right. So the fear of man, I can give you a definition and maybe we can work off of that.
Sure.
Okay. This is from Ed Welch. His book, When People Are Big and God is Small, really talks about this. We did a podcast on this probably 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's one of the ones that should not really be listened to again.
I know, yeah.
But anyway, we'll do this is the reboot, the redo.
We're wiser and more mature
Mm-hmm.
than we were.
It's questionable, but
True.
okay, here is Ed Welch's definition. Fear of man. We replace God with people. Instead of fearing the Lord, we fear others. Would you add anything to that or take away?
No, I don't know that I'd add anything to it or take away from it. I think that's a good summarization.
Okay.
I guess for me, I think it's helpful to, that is basically it in a nutshell, right? But isn't it helpful to really help somebody
think about how it manifests
That's
itself.
right. Because even as I said, thinking about these, a definition is helpful. However, it doesn't, like you said, it's multifaceted.
Right.
Fear of man. And I started thinking about it even this morning as I was preparing for this. And my phone is just blowing up right now.
People want to get on the show here.
Hopefully everything's all right. But yeah, so it manifests itself in so many different ways. And I was thinking, man, I see it there in my past and present. I see it there. I see it there. It lays a snare, and it makes me think about I've done things I shouldn't have done because of the fear of man, and I've not done things I should have done because of the fear of man. And it's manifested itself in different ways.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I guess for me, a definition of fear of man, we'd have to talk about fear.
Right.
What are we really talking about when we are fearing?
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Go for it. You lead the way on that.
So, because I'm thinking there's different ways, right? And even the scripture talks about these different ways of the fear of man. There's the fear of physical harm.
Right.
So, and I could see this if we lived in a predominantly Muslim country and we were Christians and we knew that they could take us and kill us.
Right.
So Jesus had to tell his disciples, don't fear the ones that can kill your body. Right. The psalmist said, what can man do to me?
Right.
The Lord's on my side. What can man do to me? Things like that.
I called that a trembling fear, right?
Yeah.
It's a fear, trembling what others could do to me. Physical harm.
Was that on the paper you gave me?
Yeah, maybe.
A trembling fear?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's you're physically afraid.
Right.
And I would say that that's probably not one of my big fears necessarily. I think I could take anybody at our church except maybe Matt Lanny. I think he's a pretty tough guy. He's a tough guy. He's strong, but I think anybody else I could take. But but then the other part.
Wait a minute. Hold on.
That's a good.
You just talked about fighting people in our church. We got to stop the podcast and have an intervention here.
I'm just kidding. But but that's, I don't know, for most of us, that's probably not a big deal now. We're not sitting there fearing man of what they can physically do to us. And we live in a country with laws that protect us to a degree. But anyway, the main right for me is the fear of what people will think.
Yep.
Or about me, or something I've done, or the fear of what they're, how they'll respond to something I do.
You're talking now how it manifests itself.
Yeah, so that's the way I'm thinking. So when I'm defining, when I'm thinking of the definition of fear of man, I'm saying there is that way of we're afraid somebody could hurt us, and that could be a problem and a snare. But for more practical purposes, probably our people is more fearing thoughts of us or whatever, right?
Yeah, and even going back to just the larger definition of what is fear, right? Because the Bible talks about fear most often in context of fearing God. Right, and there it's used in terms of awe or reverence. Right, it's a worship. Right, so when we think about it, either in the fear, the context you're using, fear of what other people think of me, it has to do with worship ultimately. Right.
Right.
So the other aspect that I would bring out just on the question of what is fear, so if we have a trembling fear that's fearful of what people could do to us, there's a right fear in terms of awe or reverence and worship of God. But there's also like an anxious fear in terms of I don't have control of things, right? Something may or may not happen, so it's out of my control. That's an element of fear as well. Any other things to add on that?
No, not on
Okay.
that part. Yep.
Let's talk just a little bit about then some more ways that maybe the fear of man would manifest itself.
Yeah,
Right. I think that's going to be what's helpful.
getting to the nitty-gritty of
Get down
that,
to the
because that's what I
nitty-gritty.
think will be most helpful
Right.
to all of us, right?
Okay, so I've got a number of things, maybe all, and if you have things as well that you can list, we probably have some overlap. I took several of these again from Ed Welch's book, but
I came up with my own.
I did too, some of them, all right? But why rewrite it, you know?
I'm just messing.
I don't even have.
Don't be
notes.
afraid of what I'm thinking or the people.
Right
I'm
now, I
thinking.
might be demonstrating that. Have you ever been overly concerned with what another person thinks of you?
Right.
You might be under the influence of the fear of man,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And making decisions, like you talked about this earlier, making decisions based on that, or not doing things based on what people think, right?
Mhm.
That would be a way that the fear of man manifests itself probably the most clearly.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you have one? We'll go back and forth.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about, of course, that thinking about what people are thinking about you. But I thought about the scripture passage in Romans 2 that we had, where Paul says, they're not a Jew who's one outwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart. And he says, it's the last two verses actually. He says, no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter. And then he ends the chat. Well, in our Bible, it's the end of the chapter. His praise is not from man, but from God. And I think that what we see even in the teachings of Jesus about the Jewish people of that time, especially the leaders, I think is really who he's referring to, that all of what they did seemed to be almost entirely for the praise of men. So Jesus had to teach in the Sermon on the Mount, don't be like that and do all your righteousness, practice your righteousness before men to be seen by them. Right? Because then you don't get the reward from God. And so it just struck me that is kind of a manifestation of it, is this idea of being outwardly trying to look righteous or look holy or look whatever. And it's not, we're even focused on the heart at all that only God can see. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see.
I think that's a form of fear of man when we
Right.
can act in hypocrisy righteously in front of others.
Yeah.
And it's not true because it's not who you are behind the scenes. That's a problem. That's a manifestation of the fear of man.
Yeah, that's really good.
You might even, let's say, show up to church because not because it's the right thing to do or because you love the Lord but because you're afraid people are going to think about that. Now you should still.
That's not an excuse.
Yeah, or serving. It can manifest that, and that's all of us.
Yep.
I think can face that.
Here's some more thoughts that I have, or semi Ed Welch on ways the fear of man manifests itself, and I can think of these, in the context of like a Sunday morning gathering. Really pretty. That might be a good, just start there, right?
Right.
Have you ever been afraid to talk to someone? Right? That's a manifestation of the fear of man, right? Well, and again, it goes back to the other one. What are they going to think of me, right? That's it. Avoiding people entirely. I think that can be a manifestation of the fear of man.
Yep.
It's uncomfortable for me, and I'm more concerned about how I feel. Yeah. And I don't want to feel uncomfortable or say something I don't know what to say when the conversation stops, and that makes me anxious, and so I'll just not do it. Yeah. Yet the Bible has told me I should do that.
Right. I that's an important one because that I guarantee you that's not how people are viewing that are struggling with that. Right. So if they're not wanting to talk to other people, they're not viewing it. They're just like, well, I'm shy, or I'm not like that, or it's my personality, right? Or whatever. And it's like they're not even thinking of it in terms of fear of man. Right. No. But I can tell you, because as you bring that one up, I'm thinking that I have to confess that at times too. Like you're sitting there thinking like, okay, what am I going to say to this person? What are they thinking of me right now? What if I can't think of the next thing to say,
Yep.
and then what do we do? So there are all these, kind of peculiar
Or
things.
here's maybe, I think, probably the place where it feels the most awkward, right? And especially, and I think because I've experienced this myself in the church gathering. Somebody comes to church for a long time, maybe even years. You see each other every Sunday. You've never talked. You've never introduced, and you think like, I probably should know who that person is, right? And you don't want to break the ice because you're like, we've been going to the same church for 5 years. We see each other every Sunday. We've never even looked at each other, but we both know each other exist, right? What keeps you from moving to that person is sometimes the fear of man, right?
Yeah.
Well, what are they going to think? What are they thinking of me? The fact that I've never talked to them for 5 years. Maybe they won't, things like that.
I'm thinking of a situation just like that, just thinking maybe the solution to that is an honoring of God and what he commands us to do. But in addition, true love and true humility wash that away.
Yep.
Because you're not, I think it was Tim Keller that did a little deal on this, but he talks about the fact that it's like, you're not thinking much about yourself at all when you have true love and humility.
Yep.
So it removes that fear of man's self-consciousness.
Right.
And it's more like outward directed. So you're not thinking about yourself at all.
Yep.
And that would be the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so not just breaking down that wall of shyness and doing that for God, which you are, but also asking God to work in you so that you love people in such a way that you're more like just thinking of them, interested in them. You're not really thinking about yourself or how you're being perceived.
Right. And a biblical command that goes along with this is greet one another.
Yeah.
Right. Be kind to one another, love one another. That's all entailed in this. So when you think like, I do have propensities, right? Like some of us are not the just talk to everybody, don't know a stranger kind of person. But yet there are biblical commands that don't put any qualifications on it as far as personality goes.
Right.
All right. Do you have any other things on ways the fear of man manifests itself?
I do.
Go for it.
Yeah. So
Go another one.
Right. And I was thinking about, well, how about the fear of man in manifesting itself in private sin or secret sin?
Okay.
Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. We can see that we fear man more than we fear God in our sins that we're willing to commit in private that we would never commit in front of someone else. Or even in our minds. See, sometimes, let's say we're having envy towards somebody, or seething anger towards them, or bitterness, or vengeance, or whatever, and then you talk to them and you act all nicety nice.
Yeah.
Well, you just showed that you don't fear God because he sees and knows the heart, and he's told you that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. But you did show you feared that person because you're not doing that with them, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking some of these things started popping in, or like committing a sin privately that, you don't care that God is sitting there watching this, but you would never do that in front of other people. Or acting one way at home and a different way at church and now, which is all things that, I think we can just relate to. We're not throwing stones at anybody.
Yeah,
it's like,
no.
I relate to this stuff. I am listing things out that like, wow, this is a real prominent thing, and within me. And then I thought of another one too.
Okay, yeah.
And this is a little more. Some of these are a little more abstract out there. You got to think a little bit more about these. But it's like the whole deconstruction movement and liberal theology in general, I think stems from a fear of man. Because what they wanted is they wanted the respect from man and from the world, and the way to do that, and they're finding they don't get that. So what do we got to do now? We've got to change our theology.
So it's more palatable.
Yeah, and we want to be more acceptable to the world and accepted in their eyes. That's fear of man.
Yeah.
And so those are different ways too that it can manifest itself, and even for a practical person, that can manifest itself in, like, fearing, like if you have a clear opportunity to share the gospel with somebody and you don't do it, and I had somebody tell me a story recently. They had prayed for opportunity to witness, and And God will always answer that.
Yeah.
And they were sitting in a room full of, with people at their work or whatever. And all of a sudden somebody in the room goes, "Hey, does anybody know what happens to you when you die?"
Oh,
And they're just sitting there like, and they know like all these other people are around and they're like, "Really, Lord, right now?" It couldn't have been private. So that's just like clearly the Lord. So they had to do it, and there was that natural fear of man that could have caused them to shrink back or whatever. I mean, different ways. There's so many different ways we could all come up with. But if we think about it, and here was what dawned on me this morning, I don't think about this enough. Yeah. That I need to be thinking about this more and watch for this in my own heart and life because it's there. Yep. One other, sometimes the fear of man can manifest itself when you need to confront a brother or sister about a sin. Mm-hmm. Well, you may not want to do that because you're fearing their response, and
you're fearing your own self in a way, and the accusations that could come back.
Right.
Well, who are you to judge?
Right. Yeah. So it can come in all those different ways. In our culture too, as the gospel is more and more rejected, and the Bible is more and more hated. Jesus talked about the seed sown on rocky ground. People receive it with joy, but then as soon as tribulation or persecution arise, and he says, on account of the word, Matthew 13, because they believe the word and all of a sudden the world hates them, then they abandon the faith. So it could be in many, many different ways.
Okay, let me give you a few more because I have 10.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I thought you were done. That's why I was I
got to
carry the rest of this thing.
I was rotating.
Much
so I'll give you the rest of mine here. And these are shorter, but just things that to evaluate your life, maybe things you do. Have you ever talked too much to someone, you don't know when to shut up, right, in a conversation? That could be manifesting itself in the fear of man. Again, you want to be perceived well by others, and so you just talk too much.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I'm going to feel real down after this whole podcast. So discouraged.
We need to get to the gospel.
We better
real
have
quick.
the gospel at the end.
What about being jealous or envious of other people? You talked about this, right? But if you think about jealousy or envy, you're controlled by other people and the things they have or their state in life, and you don't like that they have it and you don't, right? That's a form of the fear of man. Mm-hmm. Always second guessing your decisions or paralyzed to make a decision because you're overly concerned with what others will think, right? Should I go here, do this or that? I don't know. Well, what will this person think if I do this? Or what will this person do if I think that?
Right.
Just another form of the fear of man. Do you lie about yourself? Right? Do you lie because you're afraid of being exposed? Right? That's a form of the fear of man. What about loving the praise from men? Right? Love the praise that comes from men rather than the praise that comes from God. Do you always need to be affirmed in everything? Right, that you need people to tell you how you're doing.
Right,
that could be a form of the fear of man. And here's a way too that would also really express that. How do you feel when people don't praise you? Right, when that's gone, what happens? And then the last one I have: do you think of yourself as better than others? If so, you can still be fearing men rather than God because your life is defined by being better than someone else, right? Mm-hmm. Here's the standard. Well, I'm better than that. I'm fearing them more than I'm fearing God. God's standard is higher, right? A couple other things I just add on this, right? Here's some other terms that culturally people would use to describe the fear of man, but we don't really. Peer pressure, right? We think about that in terms, especially young people, right? You're always, don't give in to peer pressure or things like that. But that's ultimately what it is. If I don't do X, Y, or Z, and my friends are telling me what will they think? So I better do it. That's one. People pleasing, and that often is seen in never saying no to something. Right. If people are always asking me to do something and I just can never say no to it, well, why is it that you can never say no to something? Right?
Yeah.
Well, it's because you're afraid of what they'll think. And then codependency, right? That's kind of like a buzzword sometimes. Right, you need people to meet your needs in a way that only God can. Right, that's another way that the fear of man is manifest itself.
So what do we do about our fear of man?
We set you up with a good question, and you gave it to us. Well, nice. Ayden, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're asking that question because we'd like to get to the answer.
Yeah, I'd like the answer.
Yeah. Okay, twofold. Number one. the fear of man must be driven out by the fear of God. Right? That's what we need. We need to fear God, not man.
Right.
And by fearing God, we don't mean we're afraid of God in that sense. It means we reverence him, we honor him, and our desire is to please him in all things.
Right.
And if that means that people will be happy with that, great. And if it means they won't, too bad, so sad, because we're living to please God. And I was thinking of Galatians 1, verse 10 and 11, and ask ourselves these questions, or just 10, really. Paul said to the Galatian church, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God?" So maybe in these situations, as we're thinking through, like, do I have this fear of man? Oh, wow. Do I make decisions based on what people are going to think or not think, or how they're going to respond or whatever, instead of really thinking about God or any of the things we mentioned or some others that may pop into your head? Our question needs to be, am I now seeking the approval of man or of God, or am I trying to please man? Because Paul says in that verse, if I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. You cannot fear the Lord and man at the same time.
It's kind of like Jesus said, you can't serve two masters.
That's right.
Right. And the same thing.
The one we care about, the one we're concerned about what he's thinking or if he's pleased or not with what we're doing, is the Lord. And when you live that way, and then you take, you think about that in decisions, and you think about that in relationships. Who am I trying to please right now? The fear of the Lord begins to wash out the fear of man.
2 Timothy 1, 6 and 7, Paul says to Timothy, "For this reason I remind you to fan into the flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Right? So I think about, like, what do we do right here? Like in this passage, Paul is telling Timothy, and in Timothy's context, he's probably saying that because Timothy's a young pastor, he's coming into a church with maybe some problems, and he has to do some things.
He's battling the fear of man.
He's battling the fear of man.
And the persecution that's intensifying, plus the problems in the church.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so he's saying, Timothy, God has not given you this spirit of fear. Rather, like, what is he? He's given you the Holy Spirit, right? He enables you to do the right things and and the Spirit is cultivating a greater love for Christ, right? And here's a practical way. How does that happen? It happens as you are in the Word, right? You cultivate a love for God as you're in the Word regularly, and the Spirit is producing that in you. So I think Paul, like what he's saying to Timothy there, right? God gave you not a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control. So he's saying, act in accordance with that. Right? Fan that into flame. Believe this is true and act upon it.
And he's given Timothy something concrete to go by. If he's feeling the fear of man, then he can say, well, that's not coming from God.
Right.
Because God didn't give us that spirit of the fear of man. Timidity is really what he's getting. He didn't give us that. He gave us the spirit of love and power and a sound mind. So recognizing that would be these two verses, the one you brought out, 2 Timothy 1, Galatians 1:10, these are good verses to memorize if you're battling the fear of man, so that you're really being able to really think through this.
And Proverbs 29:25, whoever trusts, or fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe, right? Yep. So maybe commit to memory those passages. Yep. The other thing, too, I think that's important, because I can't imagine there's a person who's listened to this who can't identify or resonate with some of the things that we talk about in terms of the fear of man. And it is one of those things, when you think about it and you see it in Scripture, you see it everywhere in your life. Yeah. So the point of that, when the Spirit brings those things to our minds and convicts us about them, we need to respond accordingly, right? And we need to ask the Spirit to illuminate our hearts and minds to see these things so that we deal with them properly.
Right. And then act on it.
So when you're tempted to make a decision based on what somebody might think, do the exact opposite. Right?
That's right. That's right.
If you're tempted to not go talk to somebody, go talk to them.
That's right.
Right. It's very simple.
And over time, God will help us with that, I think.
I feel like, too, like, the fear of man, I feel like it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Like, you think about, like, okay, well, if I say this, then what are they going to think? And then if they go talk to this person, what are they going to think? So I should probably do this instead. And you haven't even talked to them yet. Like, oh, my word. Like, I've done that sometimes, like, even on Sunday mornings. I'm like, oh, I want to go talk to this person. But if I keep thinking about it, then it it takes away from my worshiping, and it just like it makes my heart starts to race. I'm like, this is so
It's a distraction.
It's a distraction, and I just feel like it's not worth it.
Yeah.
And so if you're living for if you're living for the glory of God and you're doing things rightly, I mean, I've been in the sense where I'm thinking way too much about what somebody's thinking about me, and it just like brings me down because it's just mentally and emotionally exhausting. And so if I'm living in a way that I know that I should be, then whatever comes from it, it's just, I just respond accordingly. And I was just thinking about how much more comforting it is too. Like I was in 2 Corinthians 1 this morning, and it talks about just blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort. And just how like encouraging that it is, that's who we serve. And so a God who's gracious and a loving Father who doesn't, he's forgiven us, and we have a new identity, and we're not trying to live like in appeasement, worried about this thing. And so it's just so much more comforting to knowing that he loves us, but that we should be serving him, because it's not what people think. It's temporary.
Yeah.
Whereas our worth is already secure in him. So it's so much more comforting to know that it's
Yeah. That's a good word. We'll land the plane right there.
Boom.
That's good. Well, we appreciate you guys listening. We appreciate having Ayden in the audience today. If you want to sign up the sweepstakes to get into the studio audience, you might have a chance. Wow. You won. Yeah, you won. Well, we hope the conversation has been helpful for you as you consider your life and how the Lord would have you to live. We trust that these conversations provoke you in that way. We love to hear from our listeners, so you can always reach out to us. If you're part of our church, to come up and talk to us, send us a text, give us a phone call. Outside of the church, send us an email at thecalvarycast@gmail.com. If you're cool, you follow us on Instagram. Follow the Instagram at the Calvary Cast.
I think so.
Did I ever tell you? 1,400 views on our little video, by the way.
Wow.
Big time.
Wow. It's probably because of the recorder.
Probably. But you can follow us on Instagram.
Which video is this?
There's the one I sent you about the meditation one.
Yeah, is our expert level.
Okay.
Yeah, the high level. That's what the kids are doing these days, is these video things. So that's what we did.
Instagram Reels.
Instagram Reel. I didn't even know what it was called. But yeah, you can follow us there, and you'll enjoy that. Send us topics if you have topics or things you want us to talk about, or if you have questions on what we've talked about. At Calvary, we exist for the glory of God, the good of his people, and the Great Commission. Until next time.